Welcome into Rates and Barrels right here on The Athletic. Oh, it's the sultry tones of a correct microphone from the Welsh. That's me, Chris Welsh, with the right microphone selected. And joining me today, as always, is the great Eno. You can find him on Twitter at Eno, fresh off of like an overnight flight. You told me you barely just got back in. People don't understand this. Like, you just got back in. Everything was delayed. You are a man of baseball for being able to do this episode today, my friend.
Yeah, there's an atmospheric river. Shout out to Jude, who I spent about 3 or 4 hours with in the airport bar.
Okay,
and,
hi Jude.
Steve Phillips showed up for a couple of those hours, and we had a couple drinks together. So at least I had some good company, but it was a rough ending to the trip. And I have to tell you, my parents ran hotels, and so I usually, see the like tough part of running a hotel and understand it's not an easy business. My mom still runs a hotel. Another shout out to Ingrid and Jerome.
My neck of the woods.
And Jerome at the Ghost City Inn. Mention my name and maybe she'll give you a discount. Maybe.
We're into ghosts. Me and my wife are into ghosts, so I need to go down there. We need to go. It's a quick little jaunt down to Jerome for us. We've never been, actually.
Yeah, that's fun. And so it was the worst hotel room I've ever had.
Now, how does one room become the worst? How did they lock that in?
Well, to begin with, before I even got into the hotel room, I couldn't open the door.
All right, that's a good start.
And it's not because of the key card. The door had one hinge that was working. And so you basically had to lift it up off of the ground in order to open or close it. You had to kind of lift it up and put your shoulder into it. So every morning as I'm like bleary eyed, trying to go get breakfast, like I had to be like, I don't know.
I feel like I had a car like that when I was a lot younger.
Yeah.
All right. So
once you get inside, I felt like they sprayed 409 on all the floors. So like if you took your socks off, it was like
gross,
like sticky.
All right, I wouldn't take my shoes off, by the way, if that's the case. But go ahead.
The air conditioner is broken or it's stuck at like 62, which is
I like that.
It's okay, but they didn't give me any blankets. So I only had a sheet. So the first night I was in there, I woke up at 3 a.m. and had to fashion a blanket out of the extra towel that I had and the sheets off the other bed. So I like kind of made a blanket in the middle of the night so that I wouldn't freeze to death. So then the shower, the water pressure, that's a common problem. It was like
a bad one.
Little drizzle on me. Couldn't really get it warm either. The bathtub had been relined, but the lining wasn't holding. So basically, anytime you walked anywhere in the bathtub, it would like crinkle. It would be like crinkle. It was a bad bathtub. Smelled like mold. Couldn't change the TV volume.
What is going? This is comical at this point. What are you talking about? This is crazy.
The cleaning lady threw away my toothpaste, and like cleaned it away. Like I had toothpaste there, and then I didn't. I'm like, what? I'm not going crazy here. Like I had toothpaste here yesterday.
Welcome to Florida. I mean, what are we talking? Was there more?
No, not really. I mean, it's the smell was bad, and Florida generally it's hard for things to dry. So I had
generally
like some
smells
wet clothes from the beach at one point that just smell. It made the mold smell even worse. But that's a pretty good combo, I think. And breakfast was the kind of breakfast they're like free breakfast, and the breakfast was kind of breakfast where everything comes in plastic bags.
Like the little pastry with the thing in the middle, like the cheese in the middle, and like a little muffin in a.
Oh, and this is the maybe grossest part. And I actually ate one of these. So they did have eggs, but they were hard-boiled eggs in some sort of weird watery liquid. Like a sleeve. It was like a sleeve of hard-boiled eggs in like a liquid.
You are a well-respected sandwich connoisseur, and you.
And I made a breakfast sandwich with a white bagel that came out of a plastic bag and an egg that came out of this like watery sleeve. And you had to hold it right or else the water would spill everywhere. Like egg water would spill everywhere.
What?
I had to get an egg out of there, smush it on my bagel, and I was like, "Oh, this is pinky up. This is high living." I was imagining like Guy Fieri, like with the plastic knife, trying to like make a egg sandwich with the egg out of the sleeve.
I mean, I didn't buy that it was actually
Or
the
wait,
worst
wait,
hotel, but that might be the worst experience across the
who's
board.
the yeller? The
Yeah, but that's who
yeller.
I was gonna say. I was thinking of Gordon Ramsay. Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon
Yeah,
Ramsay.
What
Just
is
yelling.
this? Yeah.
Or the guy from Bar Rescue.
Yeah. I can't think of his name either. Can't think of any of them. That's insane. So was there before we do all the selling and the stuff, was there anything good on the trip besides the hotel?
Oh yeah.
Good baseball. We did the episode from the Trop where my mic was off, but it was amazing looking. What happened after?
That was fun. Talked to Tyler O'Neill, talked to Drew Rasmussen finally, and it was pretty good. We talked about how there's a difference between the sort of pitch, the TrackMan numbers that you can get in practice and what happens in the game. And him and Kyle Crick were talking about how sometimes they get more movement in the game and they don't really know why. So they were talking about, trying to adjust for what they see in practice and what they actually see in game settings, which is super important for like player development and training and all that sort of stuff, because we see all these, these breathless videos from these places in the off season. And then, like Matt Brash developed a cutter. It's amazing. He hasn't thrown one in spring, that sort of deal. So, the relationship between the practice environment and the game environment. I talked to Pete Fairbanks, and I actually said the sentence, I think your stuff is too good for your body to handle.
How did he react to that?
Yeah, that wasn't, he was like, I hope not. And I was like, oh, why did I say that?
I can relate with that a little too much. Like the stupid stuff that comes out of my mouth, especially when I've talked to players, and I'm just like, that ruined it. Like that.
Yeah, right. Good job, Eno.
Yeah. There's also a thing with players too that I've interviewed that Alec Boehm was one that I interviewed. It was one of the worst interviews I've ever done. And but it was also due to him, unfortunately. Like I've done some bad interviews, a couple. One I didn't release with Curtis Mead.
He's not super engaged.
Nope. And it was pretty well known that he's not super engaged. But at the end, I had brought up his time at, I think it's Wichita State, and he was playing with his buddy, it was Grayson Janetta, I think his name is. And that perked him up. And my last 2 or 3 questions got him perked up. And I had this moment where I was like, man, why didn't I start here? Because before I was asking him about analytics, and he's like, I don't do analytics in season. And he was not into anything I was talking about. And it's just like, man, could I have just warmed him up in the beginning? That is such a better way, by the way, if you're ever talking to players, find a way to warm them up in the very beginning, than just go in and hit the stuff that they really are going to try to find a way to athlete where they're like,
I usually try to tell them they're top 10 in something. Find something they're top 10 in something.
Yeah, tell them they're good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Tell them how good they are first.
Have you ever eaten an egg out of a water bag? That's what you can ask us the next question. That's what we'll find out about.
So, who else I talked to? Yankees camp was amazing. Actually, it was amazing. Oh my God, I had this really great discussion with Clay Holmes. I have to figure out how I'm going to write it, and he had a really important question. I'll reveal it a little bit here on the podcast. It's fun.
Okay, yeah, because I'm interested in Clay Holmes, because they're putting him in more of that leverage situation, which has made me move off of him. But I'm curious.
Oh, really?
Well, they talked about that
it's
they might take him out in more of a leverage, like an 8th inning type of role.
Who finishes the game?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, that like fire
Loaizaga or King.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, so but go ahead. I was interrupting.
So we were talking just generally about seam shifted wake, and how his sinker benefits from seam shifted wake, and so I had sensed that we were having a good enough discussion that I was kind of like, so what's the plan against lefties this year? Because last year he was like a one-pitch pitcher against lefties, and he immediately started laughing. He's like, "What? You mean one pitch all year won't work?" And I was like, he's like, "Well, here's a revelation that I don't think many people know is he was actually throwing a sweeper and a gyro slider last year. So if you classify those together, the movement kind of groups together and makes it look like not as good, which is amazing because he still had great stuff numbers. But you know, he has two sliders, so he was talking about, you know, maybe using the gyro slider a little bit more against lefties because the sweeper does have platoon splits. And so, you know, he did have a plan, but then he's like, well, maybe you could research this for me.
Oh,
And he said, what if my plan would work? What if one pitch would work? It's like, I was like,
no,
well,
no, 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 no,
Mariano,
please.
no, he meant like specifically, like, you know, lefty, like righties are told not to throw sinkers to lefties anymore. And everything that lefties see now in the game is up and in, up. So they see lefties from righties see four seamers up and in, cutters up and in. And so, you know, every lefty right now is trying to figure out, like, I just had a long conversation with Kyle Schwarber about how when he came up, he couldn't do anything on the high pitch, and pitchers just kept feeding him that until he figured out what to do on the high pitch, you know? And so I think lefties now don't see the sinker low and away. And specifically, Clay Holmes' sinker, like, comes from a high arm slot and has, you know, deceptive movement. So it's a really good one. I think it might be the best in Stuff Plus, but it's interesting to think, like, you know, we heard from Chris Langen on Friday's pod that hitters are getting better at the sweeper as every year goes by, and that suggests that they're trying to figure out this new pitch. Well, you know, the righty sinker to a lefty is an old pitch. It's an old pitch that people don't see as much anymore. So maybe it can come back in vogue. So I'm going to maybe look at something for him where I look at platoon splits on pitches over time.
Interesting.
And see if, like, righties, you know, righties are maybe lefties are getting better at four seamers from righties and worse at sinkers from righties because they see more four seamers.
What would be the pitch too? What would be like the what would be the one pitch that you could rock if you were, like, if one guy, like, if he's saying you can live with one pitch, is it more of a sinker? Is it a cutter? Like, what's the most efficient of any of those, do you think?
Well, I mean, we have some one pitch slider guys like Matt Whistler. I mean, he's not, what your definition of one pitch is, we can get into semantics, but you know what I mean? He's like a 70%, 80% slider guy. And I think that's possible. I wrote a little bit about that in how the game is becoming a slider league, and how, you know, maybe the guys who throw a ton of sliders, it's because they can manipulate the shape. You know, Whistler and Griffin Jacks told me they do have, like, slightly different shapes. If you think about it, the breaking ball breaks differently to different parts of the zone. If you're throwing it arm side, it kind of, you know, can have like more of a one plane shape. And then if you hold on to it longer and throw it glove side, it has more of a two plane shape, you know? And so, you know, Madison Bumgarner told me that sometimes he could manipulate that by changing where his landing foot is. So he was more cross body in certain situations, which I think was crazy. But other pitchers have said that that's sometimes possible. But my answer would be slider or cutter, because they're manipulatable and you could actually sort of make two pitches out of it, or maybe even three, where you kind of manipulate how big the break is. For example, if you threw a cutter a bunch, and I think Holmes was suggesting that this is true of Mariano, but I don't remember this necessarily from watching, that Mariano could change the shape on his cutter.
Do you think
So you could have, like, basically like a little baby slider versus a cut fastball.
Do you think that that is possible with a starting pitcher? And I'm specifically, obviously they can't have one pitch, but like one pitch versus, is it the same thing necessarily apply? Because it seems very reliever-ish. Do you think a starter can get through a game with having like one pitch to, you know, let's just say lefties?
Oh, right. There are starters that have weird platoon splits on their pitches where they just, they only use kind of like 1 or 2 pitches against one side. Or like there are some 4-pitch pitchers that like throw 2 pitches to one side and 2 pitches to the other side. And that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. They
But
control the zone.
I think generally it's tough. I also talked to Chris Bassett at length about the fact that he has 8 pitch types. He said he has 2 changeups. So he has actually 8 pitch types. And the hidden value there on a team level, not necessarily a fantasy level, on a team level, is that he goes deeper into games. That's pretty much shown by the numbers that the more pitches you have, the deeper you go into games. He saves the bullpen. And if you have a few of those guys, you might be more likely to have a healthy bullpen in October. Think about the Rays and how hard they push their relievers all year and how often it seems they are scrambling to put together a healthy bullpen in October.
That's fascinating. All of it is fascinating because I'm also thinking of this from Kumar Rocker was what came to mind. If you want to, we don't talk about prospects, but Kumar has just one of the best slide. It's still one of the best sliders I've seen, and he can have it dip and he can have it come in and he can command it, but he doesn't really have another pitch right now. And I just wonder if you say a slider cutter is the best singular pitch, is that something he can get away with, or is that going to be a prelude to him just being a reliever, being a dominant reliever?
I don't know. I think a lot of the overachievers in baseball, a lot of the great agers, if you think about Charlie Morton, Adam Wainwright, like, a lot of the kind of outliers in baseball in starting pitching have an elite breaking ball. And there's so much I think you can do with an elite breaking ball, because elite breaking balls, you can often throw them in the zone. If you can throw them in the zone for strikes and for whiffs, then it's really hard. You can build stuff off of that, right? Now you can throw your four seam, which isn't that great. Let's say your four seam isn't that great. Maybe Kumar's can't control it. But instead of worrying about controlling it in the zone, the four seam, he can just basically spray it high. And if they're always looking for if he can throw some high sliders, that'll set up a high fastball that's not even in the zone.
Yeah,
right.
That's what he wants to. I think he wants to do that, and he just hasn't. Not to make this a prospect thing, but it's just interesting my connection with that, because also Bryce Miller with the Seattle Mariners I talked to is doing the same sweeper gyro thing as well as Clay Holmes. So it's just very interesting. You see
like sweeper gyro sinker.
That's his attempt right now. I don't know if he's throwing a sinker. I think it's a high fastball, and I think he's got a changeup as well. But he told me that he altered his slider to now a sweeper, and then that one he feels he can control, but he's also added a gyro slider that he's implementing.
Oh, usually people find they can control the gyro better, because the gyro is like kind of like a bullet. So it's just like the less movement you have. There's some research on this. That the less movement your pitch has, the more you can command it. Unless you're Corey Kluber somehow, but
like
everybody else is like, oh, this is easier than this kind of sweeper thing.
Yeah. So, okay. Besides the hotel, it sounds like it was a pretty fascinating trip of a lot of good conversation around a lot of guys and some good articles that are going to be out there as well. So make sure you guys are locked into it, which you can be at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. You guys can sign up $2 a month. Why would you not? You can get all of this great content. You can get the dynasty ranks that I've got and the draft kit, which is available. And wouldn't you know it, we actually are going to talk about some draft-based stuff today.
I had a real quick thing about sweepers, since we were just talking about it. Let me run down a quick list of relevant pitchers who've added a sweeper. So now we learned that Clay Holmes has a sweeper, right?
Okay.
Alex Cobb is throwing an 87 mile an hour sweeper. He's never had a really good slider. If he has a really good slider, I don't know. Health is always the question. Yeah, 87 is also really hard for a slider.
Yeah, I'm about to say that you're getting into like power slider type of stuff.
Yeah, so and for that much movement at 87, that's really stands out for me. Brad Keller is throwing a sweeper. And I learned that Brady Singer has a new changeup grip, and he's a bit of a stuff plus surger this spring. And
been nice to see that in the WBC, but yeah.
Jameson Taillon is throwing a sweeper.
Okay.
Clark Schmidt is throwing a cutter, and I was joking about throwing a cutter and a sweeper at the same time, and that and he was like, "Oh yeah, Jameson Taillon just keeps texting me pictures of his sweeper, it's like videos of his sweeper." He's very proud of it. So those are all. I hate to be like a trendy biatch, but those are all like much more interesting all of a sudden to me, because first of all, sliders are great. Sweepers perform really well, and these are new sliders on pitchers. Like that makes me think me like listen. Even if you just told me Alex Cobb has a new slider, I'd be interested.
So are those quantifiable things that will make you push guys? Because like Clark Schmidt got a lot of run. I heard from a lot of people after the last episode. They're like, oh, I can't secretly hide Clark Schmidt anymore. That, when you were talking about moving him up into, I think it was like the mid 50s or 60s or something like that. Are these the type of like intangibles? I mean, it's very tangible of like them adding a pitch. This is the type of thing that's going to get you probably snagging them in drafts.
The way that it's not tangible is that it's hard for me to put this into the projections. Maybe next year or maybe in season, I'll work with Jordan on including somehow last 400 stuff plus to capture some changes like this. We had found that the last 400 pitches of stuff plus is sometimes more predictive than the full season because of pitch mix changes like this. So maybe we'll be able to input that. But right now, it's not in the projections. So what you're going to see is my subjective rankings will push guys a little harder than their projections say. Right now, I have Joe Ryan 42, and he's got the highest projected ERA in the top 42, in the top actually in the top 50. He's 55, 60. Yeah, he's got the highest. Oh, and guess who has the second highest in the top 60 is Jameson Taillon, who I pushed to 56. So Joe Ryan has a sweeper. He's 42. Jameson Taillon has a sweeper. He's 56. I was already pretty in on Alex Cobb, so I didn't want to push him any further. He's at 53. John Gray throws a sweeper and a gyro, and he's at 52. So, I have but baked this into my rankings update to a some point, and rankings update on the site. Mitch Keller has a new sweeper. He's at 76. I'm the high man on Mitch Keller. And then Brad Keller surged all the way to 173. I mean, I could maybe push him up a little bit more. I'm doing this on the
fly.
Instant update. I'm pushing Brad Keller all the way to 132.
Breaking news. Of those players you were just talking about, I think you might have already answered it. Who, I don't think ADP or like rank has to necessarily dictate your aggressiveness, but I mean, obviously it would for like, you have this guy the highest. Who is the guy with all those changes that you are making sure you're locking? And I want to say you might have had Cobb higher than Taillon, but who's your most aggressive of all of these big pitch mix changes that you want to make sure you're locking in on all your rosters? Is it Holmes? Is it Taillon? Is it Cobb?
I've had Taillon. I have a fair amount of shares of Taillon. I have him in TGFBI. I have him in a couple of draft and holds. And one of the reasons that I liked him was I thought not necessarily I could count on him from like 180 innings, but I thought I could count on him for a few innings. He's in the rotation to start, and he's pretty cheap. So that was already, pretty interesting to me. And then this news sort of cemented the fact that I'm more interested in him. So that's a good combo. Clark Schmidt was somebody I was already in on. And then, but the only reason I would like sort of hesitate a little bit is that I thought he was a 6 starter. Now he's in the rotation because they have two spots in the rotation that are open to begin the season. So that gives him some runway to outperform Domingo Germán and stay in the rotation. So really, my number next to him in terms of innings reflects the fact that he could go back down 135, but he could get more than that, maybe. I mean, it all depends on the health of the guys around him and if he outperforms Domingo Germán. So
I feel like Cobb would be the guy I'm really interested in. Like, I love the idea of this like a power slider, power sweeper. The Giants also have such a good track record of just fixing these type of players and just, pushing really good improvements and solid, insane numbers that I feel like that would be the one that I jump in on, that I would want to push Cobb up. I'm a little indifferent about Taillon. I'm a little bit indifferent about like Clay Holmes. Clark Schmidt, I think, is fine. I'm a little bit worried, I guess, about the theoretical limited innings if his spot is taken away. Cobb seems like someone I would move up a little bit with those changes, but you guys can see everything of what Eno's got over at theathletic.com/rates and barrels. If you guys have signed up, if you're already signed up, good to go on the app. You get everything hooked up. We're talking about draft stuff here, and that is actually what we've got as some notes for today. NFBC drafts are the high dollar ones, kind of an always good marker. I would always as well like caution people a little bit because there's a little bit bigger risks that are taken. Catchers get pushed up, saves can get pushed up in those when you're paying attention to their ADPs. but it is always fun to track and see what the biggest differences are. So I put together a list. I got 2 lists. I don't know if we'll get to both of them. This first list I thought was a little bit more fun to yap about here. I looked at the top 100 on NFBC since March 1st draft champions. So March 1st, let's make that our marker here. It's about 2 weeks. I believe there was in draft champions 14 drafts that have taken place since March 1st. And I decided to pull apart the craziest min picks in the top 100. And what that means is the highest that any player has gone. And these ones really stood out to me. So I just wanted to chat with you about them. And if we get to the next section, fantastic, because it's a little bit different here. And again, these are going to be the highest a guy has gone, draft champions on NFBC since March 1st. This was a little bit of a surprise to me. And you tell me if you feel different. There were only 3 players since March 1st in these that have gone first overall. And that was the shock to me, that it was only 3, because I feel like there's a 5 or 6 window. And there's one player that's missing out of here that really stood out. Jose Ramirez is not on this list. Aaron Judge, Ronald Acuna, and Trey Turner were the only 3 during this time period, that went number 1 overall. Now, we don't have to, go nuts. Ooh, blah, blah, blah. Weird things can happen. But no Jose Ramirez, no Julio Rodriguez. I feel like as March came in, things are honing in a little bit, and that looks like the consensus top 3. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is funny how a consensus forms over time. Call it groupthink, call it whatever you like, but the first round is not for risk taking, and so you'll see that people will sort of come to a consensus fairly quickly. And there's there's a couple like sort of publicly available places to create auction value that more and more people are looking at. And for example, if you do the bad X for 15 teams over in the auction calculator, you get Judge, Acuna, and then Vlad Guerrero Jr., which is he's been hurt, and it's also maybe an outlier when you compare to other systems. But you're right. Jose Ramirez is 4th there. And who did you say the 3 were? Trey Turner?
Yeah, Trey Turner was the 3rd that went number 1. Those are the only 3.
And the auction calculator says he's 12th. I think that maybe the Turner love has to do with the stolen base rules and some anticipation perhaps of more stolen bases this season. But for me, I would be very happy to sneak out with a 4th place pick of Jose Ramirez. He's a guy who pulls the ball a ton. He steals bases. Lefty who pulls the ball a ton should see some shift benefit. He steals bases and he plays third base, which has been proven. Like how cool would it be to get one of the best third basemen in the game and also get 20 steals? You know what I mean? You could remove the 20 steals and he'd still be like a back end, maybe a start of the second round guy, right there with like Devers or something, you know what I mean? And you put the steals back in, you're like, this guy should maybe go in the top 3. So that's the name that sticks out for me for sure.
Also, low key, we just mentioned that exact thing. You could almost implant to Bobby Witt Jr. I know Bobby Witt in everywhere but NFBC is really falling 17, 18 ADP, but in NFBC he's got a top 10 ADP, and it's kind of exactly what you said. There's a little bit more volatility, and will he consistently hit the contact that we know we have a track record from Jose Ramirez?
I think it makes me nervous anytime, and this is a bit of a bias, but I think it's one that served me well, which is just guys who are projected for a sub 300 OBP or like a 300 OBP basically make me nervous. And you have to do so much right. And I mean, he could be the kind who does so much right? You have to make a lot of contact, be good defensively, power, speed. Looks like he has all that, but it still makes me nervous in terms of you'll still maybe see an effect when it comes to runs and RBI, because a guy like Jose Ramirez is just going to get on base more often and score more runs because of it.
So this one jumped out to me as a very, very interesting one. The number 1 pitcher with the highest min, not counting Ohtani, but the number 1 true pitcher, Spencer Strider, had the highest individual pick of any single pitcher in NFBC drafts during this time of 9. That one stood out like a sore thumb. I am definitely a Spencer Strider guy, but what say you, Eno? He was the guy here as far as pitchers go that went higher than anybody else, and that was just really not what I was expecting.
I've got 11 pitchers projected for a sub-3 ERA with the PPERA system. And 2 of them are Carlos Rodon and another player that we'll talk about maybe in a second. So those guys are currently hurt. One of them is Jacob deGrom, who actually is the only pitcher we have projected for a starting pitcher we have projected for a sub-2 PPERA, but has maybe a more aggressive health risk than anybody in the top, 30.
Who, by the way, is throwing on Monday against the AA Royals at the start of minor league spring training.
Oh my God!
I'm going over there. Yeah, I was talking with someone.
See some of the worst swings in the history of baseball.
I was talking with someone about. I've said, yeah, I'm going over to Rangers camp and I'm gonna watch that. And they were just like, I feel so bad for those AA kids. And I'm like, I know it's gonna be brutal. He's gonna mow them down. He's gonna look amazing. And those poor 20-year-old guys are just gonna be swinging for their life.
They get high fives back in the dugout if they foul a ball.
100%.
But so Strider, absolutely belongs in the top 10. I think no matter how you look at it, I don't see how you can push him out of the top 10.
Top 10 SP, you're saying?
Yeah, and then.
But he went actually, and I was wrong. 6 overall was his thing. It wasn't 9. It was 6 overall, the highest of any single pitcher above all the other pitchers.
I think if there's anybody that could be Jacob deGrom other than Jacob deGrom, it's Spencer Strider. And he set the rookie strikeout rate record last year. He's projected for a 36% strikeout rate. deGrom's projected for a 39% strikeout rate. And nobody else is projected for more than a 33% strikeout. Oh, Garrett Cole's at 34. But that's like, it is still pretty intense to be like 2 percentage points ahead of Garrett Cole, who's like the steadiest ace in the world. So, Spencer Strider, I think the bet here is that maybe we just haven't really heard any bad news in terms of health, and so people are like, could he do 160 innings? Could he do 170 innings? He doesn't have a ton of innings in his history, but he kind of went from 90 to 135 last year. What does that include postseason? 137. So, I mean, if you do that kind of jump again, you could get to 160. Now, if you got 160 innings of anything like he did last year, it could be the best pitcher in baseball, best starting pitcher in baseball. So, I get the bet, and I think the bet is basically if Jacob deGrom is worth taking in the first round, because if he's healthy, he's that good, then Spencer Strider is almost as good, and the only other pitcher I think that could be like Jacob deGrom and has better health outcomes. So I think that's the thinking with people.
Yeah. And obviously I would acknowledge to anybody, like, there can always be one outlier in a draft or something that takes one guy higher, and that is going to push this. But
you had a 9 there before, so that means there's a 9 and a 6. I mean, there's people doing this.
100%. Yeah. And either way, I think the names are fascinating, because I took out at one time, I actually did this with all of the drafts, and I was just like, let's not do that, because like Oscar Colas one time went like 22 to somebody and everything, just like crazy stuff.
Yeah, the high money drafts are, you usually don't have as many crazy outliers.
Exactly. And that's why we went to Draft Champions, to kind of take out a little bit of the volatility. This one might not be as crazy, because I am designating this list as like the crazy high pick players on NFBC during this time. But it just stood out to me. Fernando Tatis Jr. had a 12 on him, and that stood out. His ADP is 18. His range is 12 to 24, but essentially pushed into the first round. He has had a really bad spring. He then got banged up a little bit, but he's back in as a DH today, not playing in the field. So getting a little bit banged up, bad spring, both playing a role in, I think, some people's thought process, but not here, because he's going 12 overall, and he's gotten bigger physically. Arms look a little bit bigger, and maybe that's, the rust of the game is still a little bit behind him, leading to some of the spring stuff. But Fernando Tatis at 12. Do you think that takes off like all of the real true upside and is taking on way more risk than's worthwhile as a like your first pick being Fernando Tatis Jr. missing 20-ish games or whatever?
I do think that's too aggressive because, a sober look at this would say, just the auction calculator on Fangraphs, 14th best hitter. Now that's not including, Burns, Cole, Strider, which I think the top 3 pitchers should be included by the time you get to the 14th best hitter. So basically, Tatis is a back end top 20 guy. And that's on a projection of 500 plate appearance with 34 homers and 25 stolen bases and a 282 average. In this case, the system not knowing the injuries, I think, is actually a negative. Sometimes we talk about, he played through injury, he got it fixed, and he's going to be better. In this case, we had a surgery that has really affected other people's play in the past. This is maybe one of the worst surgeries for a hitter to have in terms of power outcomes later and how long it takes to recover and all that stuff. So in this case, I would look at that projection and say, well, that's a little bit rosy glasses. Like, wouldn't you look at this and be like, oh, really? You think Tatis is going to come off of 2 surgeries, of which a writer on our site was talking that the wrist surgery was actually more of a problem because they put pins in it. We had a whole thing with cosplay and pins this whole offseason. Like people are deathly afraid of pins, and he has one in his wrist.
I cited this from an article I read just not too long ago, but Devin Mesoraco was interviewed about this, and he went through a very similar injury. And he said he would be shocked because he was never the same. He would be shocked in one way if he was able to return to form right away. The other was, he said his was more long-standing, like over time, than it was like a singular moment. So like maybe that's going to be different.
Motorcycle thing,
yeah. But he was not optimistic that it was going to come right away because it affected the rest of his career. And I love Fernando Tatis Jr. I love looking. The projections are hilarious to look at. The Bat X.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's
34,
so
25 and 115 games is the Bat X. Or I'm sorry. Yeah. 34, 25, 282 average. ATC's got him hitting 277 with 30 homers, 21 stolen bases. Those are great numbers. It seems like there's so much like volatility for him to be at 12. That stood out to me. Is like, I don't know if I would want to take on that risk. This might be a little bit more of an NFBC thing. Now it gets really interesting. We got
some people play for the overall where they're like YOLO, exactly. If I think I even talked to somebody who went Tatis DeGrom.
I love that. I went YOLO and TGFBI this year. I decided to play that a little bit. I went a little bit YOLO to see what happens. And I do have Tatis on that roster, by the way. So
there you go.
I also have Alvarez.
I
took Jordan Alvarez with my first pick because he fell, but I think that's going to work out for me. And Tatis was my second. So I took on all of that risk. I know. It was absurd. Well, I also have. You want to hear the other one?
First, you're last.
I took O'Neill Cruz as well. So I just went lovely. I told you it was YOLO. But the other guy that I took on that same draft is probably the most fascinating of all of this on this list. He just signed a 8-year, $111 million contract extension. Corbin Carroll, who has been rocketing up boards. I will tell you, his ADP since March 1st on Draft Champions is 54 with a high of 40. So what say you, Corbin Carroll with a 40 high pick in these drafts? I mean, that is a 3rd round pick in a 15-team roto.
So we've talked about Corbin Carroll a lot. And so I don't know if we want to just like relitigate a lot of the stuff we talked about, but one of the things we liked is the high end speed, the stolen bases that are going to be there. We like those things, but I saw some pushback on anybody that's sort of looking at his barrel rate and his max DB from last year and saying he didn't really have that power. And I think even we were, I think, fair to him, saying it's hard to fake a 330 ISO, no matter what's going on in the park or with your exit velos. I would say that for a first attempt at the big leagues, a 5.5% barrel rate and a 107.5 max DB is not something that I would write in stone. It was only 115 plate appearances. And the last thing is max DB is usually something that you don't use to say they're bad. You usually use it to say they're good. And it's a distinction. It's a weird one, but basically it's an important event when you hit something really hard, but not hitting it might just mean you just didn't get to that moment, that, you just didn't get enough chances, so it's not something that I would hold against somebody as much as something I would say, oh, like I heard there's this prospect, Plaz, in the Pirates system. There's a 17-year-old or something. He's like a 17, 18-year-old catcher or something. I heard he was putting up 117s in the DSL.
Maybe I need to know. Okay.
Yeah. So see, that's what it's more like, rather than oh, Corbin Carroll had 107.5. So I think people are looking at that contract. He's in the news. The contract extension he just signed, he's in the news, and there's been debate about his power. And I think the upside for him is, okay, I'm going to bank 25 to 30 steals here. I believe in that. Even the projections say 20. I'm going to bank 30 steals. And what if he adds 25, 30 homers? Like, he has that capability, Projections are, the projections that say he's a decent, back end top 100 pick, I think are saying that, he's going to hit 15. But what if he hits 30? So I think that's a big part of what people are thinking about.
And the thing I would add is, like, my argument has been, if he hits 15 and he steals 30, he's going to return your value. Like, that's the goofy thing. Like, even if you're going at, 40 is a bit high, but regardless of the point, I have him in the 50s. You take him around 50 and he's a 15-30 guy, he's going to return his value. The contract extension, also, what I like about it is it provides a little bit more commitment to the team, that this isn't going to be a Jared Kelenic situation. Well, anything could, but where it's like they
probably
bring him
not
up,
going to be
struggles.
up and down.
Yeah, up and down as well. This is consistency. They believe in it.
No platooning, no like playing around this playing.
Give him a bigger contract than Michael Harris got, and his rookie of the year.
Stick him in center and just be like, that's our guy.
And stick him at hopefully the top 3 spot, 1, 2, or 3. He's going to be hitting, and I think that pushes it, and that's why he moves up. The last 2, this one stood out as an anomaly to me, I guess. But Andres Gimenez showed up at 46 on a high, and I wondered if that had to do with trying to get stolen bases out of the second base spot, if maybe the other guys had already gone. But Andres Gimenez at 46, probably says someone's taking him over Tommy Edman at this point. Like, you could justify the other 4 big second basemen went, but this would probably say someone has Andres Gimenez at 5. And that was another one of those that stood out. He has an ADP of 80 in here, and he has a pretty big range, by the way. His low is 101, but a high of 46. I don't know where you are on Andres Gimenez.
I got him at 82 in TGFBI. So that's on the lower end of that's on the later end, right?
Just like in the bottom end. Yeah. His overall ADP is 80 so far. So you got,
I got him right around 80. Yeah. And I enjoyed it. I think that what happens is there's a little bit of draft dynamics here. If you're drafting late in the first round, what I've noticed is that a lot of the guys late in the first round that are there don't steal bases. And so there's a way to get out in the first round. Like, for example, my TGFBI start was Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Mike Trout. I love it. Okay. I think it's going to have a real high batting average and a ton of power, but I may get out of there with 10 steals, or maybe less, maybe 7.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was chasing steals, and I think there's some builds where you come out chasing steals, and Andres Gimenez is like a top 5% speed, sprint speed guy that stole 20 bases last year on a team that stole, what is it? I should be precise. I should say the actual number and not just be like top 5 or whatever it is. Cleveland stole the 3rd most bases in baseball last year. The rules are changing to become more nice to stolen base people. And that's part of their identity. So you could easily see Andres Gimenez stealing more. And also it seems like a real bankable 20 at the very least,
Yeah.
And so I think it's about team build, where the people that went maybe Vlad, Trout, starting pitcher, reliever in the 5th are like, And you're saying earlier than the 5th. What's
Well,
the
I'm
early?
saying like, yeah, 46 would be the
That's like
beginning of
the
the
third,
4th round.
fourth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also like it had to be over like Tommy Edman, who's another one of those guys. Like Tommy Edman and Andres Jimenez are kind of similar-ish player. I just thought it was fascinating if he's pushing
I
up
had
and
Edmund on the board and lost him and maybe did a different pick and then went Ben Jimenez like in the next round. So I let him drop to the 5th, but I was looking at him versus Edmund, and I could see how there's maybe a little bit of a panic aspect to
yeah.
that too, where it's like I had Edmund circled as getting me the 20, 30 steals out of the MI slot, and I need that for this build, and he just went. And then
And so
they
it's like I got to get my guy.
sort by stone bases, middle infield. Oh, Jimenez,
And second base is
but
not a great position. So
yeah, it's not a great position. But also interesting was I was hanging out with Garrett Cole, and we were watching some WBC in the clubhouse, and really kind of out of nowhere, he was like, Andres Jimenez, good player.
just
Garrett Cole stamp of approval. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
We'll take that.
I mean, it's interesting because the batted ball stats aren't very good, but I think sometimes, like, what do you want out of him? Like, we're not asking him to hit 30 homers. So if he hits 12, it's not going to sink your season. He's probably going to hit at least 12. He's projected for like 16. That's what you want, like you can do that with a 6% barrel rate. There's plenty of people who do that sort of stuff, so
that's kind of my argument with Corbin Carroll too. Like that's why maybe 40 is a bit high, but like you get into the 50s and 60s with Carroll and it's like you get 15, 30.
You're really just buying the 30 steals with more than 0 homers, like with double digit homers, and where it goes in the double digits, you're not quite sure, but you're happy with it.
Yeah, exactly. You can make do. The last one on this list, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just burn through the names on the other one and see if there's a guy you like. And there's a good transition to it is Jordan Walker. Jordan Walker shows up on this with a 99 overall. Yes, that is where we have moved. During this period of time, you'd be interested. He has an ADP of 151. 149 is the technical one on here, but either way, 150 will do the average is his ADP, but he had a high pick of 99 on Draft Champion since March 1st. And there's no guarantees, but people are starting to make their bets as Tyler O'Neill's moving to center. Jordan Walker has been really good, though he suffered a little thing the other day. I think he's going to be fine. But what do you think about Jordan Walker pushing top 100? Because it's happening without him being affirmed the job, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, it's pushing. I mean, they're all the signs point to he's getting the job. The fact that Tyler O'Neill's playing center field, the fact that they're playing him so often, the fact that they've sort of given him a position in the spring, and that he's among the league the team leaders in plate appearances. All these things are pointing to a kind of Julio Rodriguez-ish like rise into the role, and just like he's going to break camp with the team kind of thing. I think all that stuff points in that direction, but when you start getting into the top 100, you start pushing him ahead of some more known quantities. This isn't going to sound very sexy, but Taylor Ward is a really good player. Like, to set the min pick on him is 102 in here, and it's set by Tanner Bell, Smart Fantasy BB on Twitter. And that guy is smart as heck. And the projections love Taylor Ward, and it's just bankable. You just know what you're going to get. And it doesn't include a high strikeout rate and a low batting average, which it's possible that even if Jordan Walker gets the job, he has a high strikeout rate and low batting average. There's nobody putting 60 hit tools on him. He's high swing strike rates in the minors. It's possible he's more of your sort of lower batting average, high strikeout rate slugger types. That's still in the range of possibilities. 100, you're taking him over Taylor Ward, Jake McCarthy, who I don't love, but Christian Yelich, Chris Bryant, Stephen Kwan. There are some good players here that you're taking him over, and I'm not sure I would push him ahead of all those guys.
The last thing in the transition to this is I made this list that wasn't just draft champions. It was all of it since March 1st. And these were players that were inside the top 100, who had a min pick inside the top 100, whose ADP was outside the top 130. and had positive change. So people can kind of follow that positive change with an inside the top 100, but ADP outside the 130. And our friend Jordan Walker was in there. Funny enough, his actual high pick, if you take out just draft champions, was 80 with an ADP of 134. Here are the other names. Chris Sale with a high pick of 73, ADP of 138. Brandon Drury, an 84 high, ADP of 181. Tyler Glasnow was in there, had one of the biggest changes on this list besides Walker, had a high of 98 with an ADP of 160 from March 1st on. Matt Chapman, 98 with an ADP of 150, and Jorge Polanco, 99 with an ADP of 145. So again, these are players with ADPs outside the 130 that broke inside the top 100 and represented positive change from March 1st on. Is there a name on this list that stands out to you? We just talked about Walker. I think you might have been alluding to maybe Mr. Chris Sale a little bit earlier, who really is jumping up boards with a 73 min pick.
Well, actually, Tyler Glasnow is the other pitcher that is projected to have lower than a 3 ERA. And I think there was an overcorrection early, and he was dropping into the 200s, Tyler Glasnow was, at which point you're like, well, it's not like the other guys are healthy down here. It's not like I can bank from, 180 innings of great pitching from guys in the 180s, So I got Glasnow at 198 in TGFPI. And I think that was an overcorrection where, I took him after Jameson Taillon. I think, it's like, that's weird. Tyler Glasnow is, got some of the best stuff in the big leagues. So this, however, the pendulum may be swinging too hard for me. I mean, I would never, I think, use a 98 pick on Tyler Glasnow. That's sort of what I would have done before the injury, I think, maybe. And so I don't know if I love him that much. I think the ADP of 160 is okay. That's around there, 160 to 200. I'd be interested in taking a shot because you can hide him on your bench. The other idea that I think is interesting here is that Brandon Drury at 84. I think some people are overvaluing multi-position eligibility, and I saw him go for a high number in AL labor. And I get it that it's nice to like move guys around and have a backup plan. If this guy gets hurt, I'll just move Drury over to third. I get that. But there are a lot of guys later on in the second base pool in particular that could do this for you for a lot cheaper. Tyro Estrada, Luis Urias, behind, they go maybe around him, but they also offer their other options. So you don't have to pay that hard for Drury if those other guys are on the table. Josh Rojas gives you 2B, 3B. Luis Rengifo, I think, is going to play a fair amount for the Angels, and he's 2B, 3B. Brendan Donovan is pulling the ball in the air and adding maybe some power. That's the Cardinal magic right now, is pulling the ball in the air. They were number one in baseball last year in pulled errors. So if Donovan adds that to his package, he's already a guy that has great contact. So I wouldn't push Drury that high. Just a guy that old who put together a great season. No matter what, you're going to regress him off of that. Yeah. And so I think that high pick is too much. I wonder what's going on with Chapman and Polanco. I think Polanco is, we just talked about this a little earlier. I think second base is a tough position, and Polanco represents a bit of a shelf for me at the position where he's a $13 player. Behind him, you've got Ketel Marte in the auction calculator is $12, but that's a lot of injury. Jake Cronenworth has some power risk, and he doesn't really give you steals, so he's he might just be kind of a batting average with a little bit of each, and then beyond that, there's no double digit second baseman. So Jorge Polanco might be one of those like, oh, this is the last like $13 to $15 second baseman, and behind him it gets uglier, Yeah,
I completely agree with you. It's an interesting look across the board, from the craziest high mins in NFBC to some of the players that really stand out, and maybe a little bit of draft prep in there. Some good stuff for you guys. That is going to do it for the episode. I'm glad that you now no longer have to eat eggs out of bags, or you can have a nice normal shower, and you you can just have a nice
Sleep in my
blanket
own
tonight.
bed.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can be warm tonight
It
without
was
having
nice to
to
sleep in my own bed.
pull like a Naked and Afraid and have to like, sew together some towels and stuff like that. So it's good.
So like I put the blanket in between the sheets to like make it like the towel in between the sheets to like make it like a blanket. It was
So if you need to know where not to go in Florida,
MacGyvering.
we'll tell you. We'll tell you. Make sure to check us out, theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Go and subscribe today. $2 to get you set up. All of Eno's great stuff there. And really, there's no reason why not. It's a fantastic deal. And we'll be back tomorrow. Eno and I are going to be talking about prospect stuff. You can find Eno on Twitter, Enosaurus, myself, as is it the Welsh. Until next time, friends, have a fantastic one. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.